Hi there, it's Ron Gula with the Gula Tech Cyber Fiction Show. Today our guest is Cyberspace Solarium member, founder, leader, supporter, right? Suzanne Spaulding. Suzanne, how are you?
I'm great, Ron.
Thanks for making the trek out of the hinterlands of DC to the hinterlands of Middle Maryland.
Well, it's great to be here. It was really, my starting point was in the hinterlands of Virginia.
That's
so
right.
Even worse, but no, it was worth it. Great
That's
to be
phenomenal.
here.
So what are you doing today? You're at the CSIS. What does CSIS stand for?
CSIS is the Center for Strategic and International Studies. It's the world's premier national security think tank, certainly the country's premier, and we like to think the world's premier national security think tank. And I joined CSIS on a kind of part-time basis in 2017, shortly after leaving the Department of Homeland Security. And I have been working since arriving there, primarily on a project that I created, defending democratic institutions.
So we're definitely going to talk a lot about that. And before we go into your work there, you've also volunteered at a number of places, including Defending Digital Campaigns. We're both co-board members. But before all this, you had a pretty unique role at the Department of Homeland Security. How did you end up at DHS?
So I wound up at DHS because Rand Beers, who was the Undersecretary at the time for the National Protection and Programs Directorate, which was the predecessor to CISA, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, reached out and asked me to talk to him about coming in as his deputy. And I had known Rand for many years, had tremendous respect for him, and had been looking at critical infrastructure and cybersecurity issues for many years. And the opportunity to work on those issues with Rand and be a part of this important mission was what drew me to DHS.
So thanks for your service. I mean, you're giving up a lot going to help so many people and protect the nation. But I think it's funny. We had Brian Ware on the show as well, and he had a similar story where he got invited to a dinner, and next thing you know, he's kind of working there. So for anybody who's trying to aspire to work to DHS or perhaps other government agencies, either avoid or go to those dinners, which is good. So how long were you at DHS?
So I started in 2011, and I left at noon on January 20th of 2017.
Noon.
Yeah.
Why noon?
That is when the next president was sworn in to office. President Obama, who appointed me at DHS, asked us to run through the tape, and so I did.
Phenomenal. So what were some of the things you worked on while you were at DHS?
So the National Protection and Programs Directorate actually had a mission that was even broader than what CISA's is today. We had, in addition to the all hazards mission for critical infrastructure, again, physical and cyber, so the cyber security mission as well as part of that. We had the Office of Biometrics and Identity Management, which turns out to be a pretty important part of cybersecurity, identity management, but this was around biometrics and primarily focused at the border. The Federal Protective Service, which provides security for federal buildings and facilities all across the country. I created the Office of Cyber and Infrastructure Analysis, which combined, again, in the analytic context, cyber and physical. I'm probably forgetting at least some piece of what was part of that portfolio, but those were the key elements. And so a big part of what I spent my time there doing was creating a cohesive strategy for why all those missions belonged in the same organization, because they'd all been added at different times and they all viewed themselves as being separate pieces. And so bringing about a greater unity of effort around the protection of our critical infrastructure was really my primary focus for all those years.
Yeah. Separate pieces implies separate careers, separate budgets, separate successes and stuff. So without throwing any gas on the fire or water under the bridge, what were some of the fights you had to fight, either at Congress or with the White House or just even within DHS?
Well, the biggest challenges were within DHS and within NPPD, to be quite honest. The folks in the different parts of NPPD did not really, many of them, see themselves as engaged in the same mission. And yet we needed them to work together to address the challenge of really providing comprehensive security and resilience to critical infrastructure. And I'm a huge believer in the need for this holistic approach, particularly for solving our cybersecurity challenge, that we need to understand the effects in the physical world, right? We don't care, you and I, about protecting computers. We care about ensuring that the functions that those computers, those networks, those systems enable are able to continue to provide the essential goods and services and functionality for the American public, for business, for government. So getting them to work together to share the infrastructure protection folks' knowledge about cascading consequences, interdependencies across sectors that could be disrupted through cyber, to share those insights with the folks that in our cyber division, which were focused really intensely on the IT networks, right? To bring those together was essential for that risk management and for addressing this challenge.
So a big part of risk management is who your threats are. And I could imagine when you're looking at all these threats to the country, to the infrastructure, it's everything from, terrorism, protests, natural disasters, to nation state actors. Anything on the fringes there? Like, were you worried about aliens, coming in? Probably not, right? But at the same time, were you guys worried about like earthquake resiliency, and things like that, which could seem like fiction, but that's probably a reality.
Oh, it was absolutely a reality that we had to worry about. And I remember exercises around, massive earthquakes in the West and how we would respond to that, working with state and local officials. We did a series of regional resilience assessments all across the country where we posited all kinds of scenarios. The electric grid, the GridX exercises that we did every few years with our electricity companies and their CEOs almost always posited a physical and cyber combined attack, for example. So we needed to worry about those things. The kinds of issues that maybe people don't think of right off the bat that were included in that also were things like GPS. Less for the navigation than for the timing. As you know, GPS is responsible for position, navigation, and timing. And the timing is an essential element for much of our critical infrastructure.
I think that's well said. And again, it also does seem a little bit like a Tom Clancy plot or movies. I remember after 9/11, we called it Hollywood theater, where the average citizen and even professionals would come up with these sort of like armchair quarterback scenarios of ways to take down the U.S., ways to inflict harm. But that was kind of the job. If you're going to protect critical infrastructure, you've got to figure out all these different ways. So did you ever like watch the X-Files or the $6 Million Man and go, you know what? We hadn't thought of that.
I don't remember that kind of a moment.
Maybe not the $6 Million Man, right? But certainly the X-Files.
Yeah. Well, listen, there are lots of smart people out there who are writing about and positing and warning such that you really don't have to rely too much on fiction to be able to imagine the kinds of scenarios that we anticipate. But yes, as I recall, Bruce Willis had
a movie or two, right?
There's
actually a movie where a former disgruntled DHS leader kind of goes after the grid and maybe somebody should take Chris Krebs' face and superimpose that in the movie or something. Use a deep fake there, right?
A whole season of Homeland.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And then where were you before DHS? What were you doing? Where'd you go to school? That sort of thing.
Oh, well, we're going to go back to that. I went to college and law school at the University of Virginia, Wahoo Wah. And I spent a number of years in private practice. And I've sort of, over the years, I moved around a lot. I won't go through my whole bio, but I've bounced often between government and the private sector. And with some time on the Hill, time at CIA in the General Counsel's office, working with the folks primarily who are worried about the spread of weapons of mass destruction, the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. And as I say, in between, I'd sort of do stints with private sector. So right before going into DHS, I spent 7 years in private practice with a law firm in town and doing primarily national security work.
And as a lawyer and all of the different things that, I guess for the viewers of the show who aren't really familiar with what titles are and what the roles of governments are. So as a lawyer, does that give you sort of that legal construct to say who's got the right authority to do this, or to even know who to go ask for permission or maybe forgiveness to do things in cyberspace?
So I think that definitely there is some of that. What I've often said is that I appreciate my legal training because it is given me an analytic framework. One of the things that you learn in law school is how to analyze a case, how to analyze a situation. I think it's probably not too different from the kind of analytic framework you get in lots of technical fields, right? As an engineer, for example, or how to break down a problem, a framework for addressing an issue and a problem. And so that's been a key advantage. It also has allowed me to challenge my lawyers on occasion.
That's excellent. And
Yeah.
we're going to talk more about this in a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. So right after DHS, pretty sure it was almost immediately, you became involved with the cyberspace solarium. Was there a gap there, or you went right into the solarium more or less?
No, the solarium started a year and a half ago now.
Okay.
So we're just in our second year, just really sort of starting.
Just
our
getting
second
started.
Year. Yeah.
So could you tell us what's your perspective on the solarium? What is it? What's your role? What have we accomplished to date?
Yeah. So the solarium has been a fascinating experience. I was a little reluctant when I got the call asking if I would serve, be an appointee to the commission from Congress, because I was swamped and I have done lots of commissions. I was executive director for a commission on WMD. I was executive director of a commission on terrorism. I have, been part of a consultant to several other commissions. And as we all know, with the exception of the 9/11 Commission, these commission reports often just go on a shelf and gather dust. And I thought, there have been a lot of commissions on cybersecurity, a lot of
Blue ribbon commissions,
yeah.
even, right? Right.
I was on the CSIS commission for the 44th president back in 2008. But I ultimately was convinced, primarily by the other people who were on the commission, that this would be an interesting exercise, if nothing else. It was really fascinating and very different from all my other experiences. And I'll just cite a couple quick reasons why. One is it had 4 members of Congress, bipartisan, bicameral, co-chaired by a Republican in the House and Angus King in the Senate, who caucuses with the Democrats, though he's an independent. It had members of the executive branch who were commissioners, not just there to brief us, but who were there for every meeting, or at least represented at every meeting. And some of them represented on a consistent basis by the deputies. The deputy secretary of DHS was at most of our meetings. The deputy director of FBI was at most of our meetings. The deputy secretary of defense was at most of our meetings. So it was really interesting to get that ground truth from them. The final and most rewarding difference between this commission and others is that our members of Congress have worked so hard to get our recommendations enacted into law. So it has really made a difference, which is remarkable.
And for a lot of the, I mean, even today, and I apologize, I haven't read up on it. I think somebody suggested they want to have not like a cyber peace corps, but like a cyber national guard. That was kind of in the solarium. So there's been a lot of things like that passed. Chris Inglis becoming is the official title czar. No, we're not doing czars, and it sounds a little bit too Russian, right? The White House cyber coordinator.
We haven't had great experience with czars.
No, we haven't.
Called czars, right?
We haven't.
So no, we resist that title. This is the National Cyber Director.
Exactly.
Yep. And it was just wonderful for Chris to be nominated for that position. I think he'll be outstanding.
Yeah. I think he said that he's got to come on the show before he can actually take the position. So we'll see how that goes.
Great.
So there's been a lot of things in the solarium, and it's so hard for people to say, hey, why do I got to patch my computer? Like, why doesn't Comcast, fix my things for me? Cyber is so many things and so many things. So I just want to cherry pick a few things that the solarium did. So one of the things they wanted to talk about was imposing costs on our adversaries. And it's not like the Ravens versus the Steelers. We're talking about Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, that sort of thing. So we just had SolarWinds, and we just basically outed all the hackers, and we imposed some fines on a couple things, a couple companies in Russia, which is a very reasonable response. Do you think that's enough? Should we be doing more? Do we need like a Hollywood theater to come up with new ways to impose cost on our adversaries?
So SolarWinds is an interesting case, and folks like Dmitry Alpavarich, uh, have suggested that we shouldn't be imposing huge consequences for this because it is basically traditional espionage, because it was relatively responsible activity. I don't agree with the characterization of it as traditional espionage. I think once you extend into particularly the private sector and critical infrastructure companies, now, as Ann Neuberger has said, we don't know whether you are just taking information that you could use in trade negotiations, et cetera, whether you're stealing intellectual property to help your companies, or whether you're doing reconnaissance for a disruptive attack. So we are within our rights to assume the worst, to assume that this is a preparation of the battlefield. So I think significant consequences were warranted, and I thought the administration did a pretty good job of putting together a package that imposed some consequences. So in addition to, I thought they made some good use of our economic leverage with respect to the restrictions on financial transactions with regard to the ruble, access to our capital markets. I think we've never used that as well as we could. There were quite a few entities. I thought it was good that they brought in the election disinformation at the same time, because again, Russia sees information operations and cyber as all of a one. We have traditionally separated them. I think to bring them together in this package was a good idea. And I think disclosing their infrastructure that they use imposes costs on them. But I thought the piece that I really appreciated was that they went beyond just the imposing costs to the other piece of how you change your adversary's calculus, which is denying benefits. So there's a whole section in there about how we're going to work on strengthening our ability to be resilient against this kind of activity, including significant steps with our global partnership and training and assistance to our allies.
I think that's very well said. And again, very reasonable. Definitely agree with all that type of stuff. But one of the impacts here, SolarWinds, is being renamed to Enable, which is a little too close for tenable in my case. But I thought that was an interesting kind of fallout from this.
I hadn't heard that. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's something along those lines.
Yeah.
You heard it here first in the Google Tech Cyber
There
Fiction.
you go.
So without going into classified, you worked agency, you worked obviously cleared, working with a lot of these different folks. Very often I'll see people who are cleared. I'm not saying you do this. I'm saying we all know these people, right? Where they kind of do a cleared smokescreen thing. I could tell you that that's classified, kind of thing. But the general public is really kind of left out of this conversation. Like we really don't have a general public that understands basic cyber disinformation and how social media works, let alone what defend forward really means, and how much our I think if like my mom knew like what China and Iran and Russia was doing maybe on her street, that the general public might be more. So how do you handle that in the solarium? Did you have classified things? Did you debate about declassifying things and getting more people in Congress briefed on certain things?
That was another difference from the earlier commissions for which I was executive director. We had one classified briefing at the very start of our process.
It's top secret. Russia did it.
In which,
have a good meeting, right?
And all I could say about that classified briefing is that there was really basically no classified information imparted to us, and I think that helped inform our decision to work on an unclassified basis for precisely the reasons that you have articulated. We knew that this needed to be a report that could be shared in its entirety with the public. There is far too much overclassification in the intelligence community writ large, but in cybersecurity particularly. So no, all of our work was done on an unclassified basis, and there is no classified annex. There's no classified pieces to this.
Very cool. So there's so many different things you've given. It was you, Chris, Admiral Montgomery. Was Admiral? Did I just promote him? Lieutenant Commander? No, Admiral.
I think it was
Admiral, right? Right. I didn't. I might have depromoted him, whatever that is there. The RSA 2020, right before COVID, you guys did a really nice panel. I'll put it in the show notes. Recommend people go check that out. But just kind of rapid fire. I'm going to hit a couple cyber hot buttons and I'm sure you guys debated about this thing. So cyber insurance. What's your thoughts on cyber insurance?
So cyber insurance needs a lot of work. It's done pretty well in terms of offering products with regard to the theft of PII, for which we have state laws all across the country, and we need a national law that tell us exactly what needs to be done. You need to notify people, you need to offer them free credit reporting, et cetera. And it requires that you notify folks for whom this has happened. So we have a lot of data on that. We know what the mitigation is. We know what that costs. That's pretty easy to buy insurance for. Where we really need the insurance companies to step in and play a role is with regard to things that can cause business interruption, business disruption. That's, again, that enabling function that we worry about. And there, I think they have been hamstrung by a lack of what we would call actuarial data, lack of data because companies aren't very forthcoming. You might hear about some of the major breaches, particularly where it involves things that have to be notified, but oftentimes you won't even hear about the activity, let alone what it cost a company. So calculating, using that kind of data to assess risk, the insurance company to assess that risk and build products based on risk the way they do in every other area, I think has been really stymied. And as a result, I think a lot of these cybersecurity products are priced based on what the market will bear, which is a little nervous making, and has so many carve-outs that the customers are not aware of. So it needs a lot of work. And we touched upon this in the Solarium report. We need to certify, we need to help the insurance professionals to be able to understand how to better assess.
I think there's a
risk.
National Cyber Bureau of Metrics was also proposed.
National Cyber Bureau of Statistics.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yep.
And part of that is because we don't have, like, a fire in a house is a fire in a house. A cyber incident in a house or a business, that's still debatable. What is an incident? So
Yeah.
we need that. Talk about IoT security, supply chain security. What did you guys touch on there?
So we touched on it in our main report, but then we realized that we really needed to do a deeper dive, particularly on ICT and information and communications technology supply chain. And so we did a subsequent white paper with additional recommendations on that. And I just gave a long talk about this yesterday. I think the key takeaway for me with regard to supply chain is that we really need to make sure that before we start rushing forward with solutions to what we see as the threat here, that we've done our careful risk assessment and analysis, risk management, that we have a strategy that's based on understanding where are the real problems and where are the carefully targeted places where government intervention, carrots and sticks, make sense.
It's always funny because, we talk about Huawei and Cisco and, Ericsson, all that stuff's built in the same place in China. Apple built in China. I mean, some of it's built in the U.S. and whatnot. So it's a very hard issue to kind of roll apart. All right. So the last thing I want to go into, just from a Solarium, but it's really much other things. Let's talk about election security. So when I say election security, what's the first thing that hops into your mind coming out of the Solarium?
Well,
still in the Solarium, I should say.
Coming out of the Solarium, but also coming out of my time at DHS, because of course I was there leading the men and women who were working on election security all through 2016. And the first thing that comes to my mind, even now, is trust. It's really all about public trust and confidence in the legitimacy of the process so that they will respect the legitimacy of the outcome. And traditional malicious cyber activity is one of the ways that an adversary can undermine trust in that process.
And so even in 2016, this was an issue. And I think in 2016, we were more worried about flipping votes and affecting the actual count. And maybe in 2020, we were more worried about disinformation. Would you agree with that?
I think that's true.
It's
We should
oversimplifying
have been more worried earlier on in 2016, obviously, about disinformation. It was a huge issue and we were aware that it was going on. We did not have a good handle on the scale and scope of disinformation in 2016. But I will say, when we first saw the cyber activity around voter registration databases in 2016, our first immediate thought was confidentiality of voter registration, information in those databases. And then we realized, it's not that sensitive. That much of that information is publicly available. It did not take us long to figure out that what the real advantage to an adversary of getting into voter registration databases would be to cause disruption on election day. Right? You delete a bunch of names, you change addresses, you change spelling. People show up, they're not on the rolls.
You
they're
fake the weather,
complaining.
you say it's going to rain.
Well, you can do lots of other things to disrupt
now we're in
election
Hollywood
day.
theater, but this is,
Yeah.
But
that traditional cyber activity was actually part of an information operation. It was I believe, to put Russia in a position, should they, choose to do so, to undermine the legitimacy of the outcome of the election. I believe it was hedging their bets. If Hillary got elected, they were going to do everything they could to delegitimize that election.
With from a DHS point of view, when you think about the ones and zeros side of an election, you've got the voting booth, you got the tabulation, you've got all the communications and stuff like that. Like, all right, that's fine. How much from DHS did you know about, like, did the team work in an election know about, like, okay, yes, Hillary's going to win New York State. It's probably not going to be New York State, right? Florida's probably going to be a battleground. Like, how much were you there, like, on a year before, kind of like where we are? Like, election night, everybody comes, they become an election expert. Here's the counties, here's the votes, here's the electoral. How much of that was kind of built into your team?
I would say not a lot. We were less focused on trying to handicap the race and more focused on making sure that we were working closely with our state and local officials to share with them everything we knew and to hear from them. And that was a huge challenge, as you may recall. We got off to a rocky start with our secretaries of state because we immediately started talking about election infrastructure fitting the definition of critical infrastructure. It just does. But they were very worried that meant a federal takeover of elections. And unfortunately, that really chewed up a lot of our energy in our conversations with state and local officials. Despite that, we were working with many state and local election officials on scanning their systems. On a few of them, let us come in and do some hunt activity. And we did have a war room on election night. So, we were not sort of trying to think what state is going to go in which direction, and therefore where should we be looking. We were really focused on making sure we were giving everybody all of the resources that we possibly could.
I think that's pretty interesting. So from an election technology point of view, yes, there's Windows computers on the back end, but on the actual voting booth, how much did your team have to become experts in these new? I feel bad, even though I prepped, I didn't write down the name of these vendors, but there's some of these vendors out there that all they do is they count votes. Oh my gosh, who was the one that's just in the last? I'm sure you know.
You thinking about like Dominion?
Dominion, yes. I couldn't think of it for a second there. Yeah. That's what I get for lack of prep. But did you have like your own lab with that kind of stuff? And how does it I remember at Tenable, we were always like, well, maybe we should scan some of these things. But they wouldn't sell them to us. Yeah. So it's really proprietary and closed. Yet you're there to kind of show up and help and try to identify Russian hackers.
Yeah. So there was definitely some of that working with more cooperative vendors, working with state and local election officials who own those, voting machines. But I will say that was not a key focus. It really was. Our focus really was not on the risk of flipping votes, because an early assessment by the experts who worked for me at DHS, in collaboration again with folks in the sector, was that the risk was less that an adversary would be, or a bad actor would be able to change enough votes to impact a national election and do that in a way that was undetected. given all of the safeguards that have been built in over the years around physical protection of the machines, not having them connected to the internet, et cetera. And that the risk we needed to worry about much more were these voter registration databases and the confidence in the process. So we started even then with this pushing for adoption of paper ballots. And I love that example because it instructs us about so much. Paper ballots are not going to prevent necessarily someone from getting in and trying to, change how that election comes out, but it gives you an audit trail, right? It gives you a way to go back and see what happened, right? If you've implemented paper ballots in a proper way, you have a very good audit trail to restore confidence, or at least be able to tell the story of what happened here. So it reminds us that trust is at so much of the heart of cybersecurity these days. The other thing is it's an analog solution, right? So it is not a solution that would normally be devised by our IT cyber ninjas, who are focused on the ICT technology, right? But it is the kind of solution that if you bring a holistic approach to this and you bring in all of the players, and so for businesses, I say, bring in your operations people, bring in your marketing people, et cetera. Think of all the ways you can mitigate the consequences of a successful cyber attack. Your IT people can no more help you think that through than the electrician can tell you what the impact on your business is going to be if you lose power for a week, right? So it is a really good, I think, demonstration and reminder of how that holistic approach is necessary, and sometimes an analog solution is going to be what we rely on.
So the engineer in me and my knowledge of the physical failings of cyber, I definitely agree with paper ballots. I'm a little disappointed in our industry, though, that we couldn't do something better. I think we're a little hampered by not having a national ID, for example, a national ID that we can use for maybe federal email, things that are illegal like that. So I think these things, you look to other countries like Ukraine, they do all their voting online. And, I think that might be a rose-colored glasses, looking down the road. But at least Tim Cook has come out and said that he wants people to be able to vote on their phone. How do you feel about stuff like that?
I think it's something we definitely should aspire to. Accessibility is really important. We should all have as our goal to get as many people to vote as possible, right? Having, the highest percentage of folks voting in our elections. And so certainly ease of access will make a big difference. People can vote on their computers, can vote on their phones. We absolutely should not do it until we have a way of ensuring that, again, we can sustain public trust and confidence in the legitimacy of the process and the outcome.
Yeah, we voted by mail this year, and I actually got an email from the state of Maryland that they got my vote. I was really impressed by that. I kind of wish I almost had a code where I could go in and get some sort of I've done some of these two-factor things, like what's your code word and whatnot. Let me see if did they tally my vote correctly. I'd be
Right.
very curious if I could see that. And then it was interesting that a few people wanted to change their votes this year. We had the second debate, and and apparently some states you had those processes, which I thought was really, really interesting. I want to stay on election security, but pivot a little bit to something we're both involved with. So when you think about election outcome influence, I always imagine, evil dictator somewhere. Oh, there's this woman, Suzanne Spaulding. She's going to run someday somewhere. So let's find some reason to get some dirt on her early so she'll never, ever run. I think this actually happens quite a bit. Our people who are running for office have no defense for their campaign. So we're both members of the board for Defending Digital Campaigns. What is your thought on Defending Digital Campaigns? Why is it needed? What does it do?
Yeah, it's a great organization. And as you know, it was spun off of an effort up at Harvard's Belfer Center, which is the Defending Digital Democracy
Yes.
project, and which Ron and I are both involved in. And a couple of those folks, Robbie Mook and Matt
Rhodes.
recognized that campaigns were a crucial element here. The project had been working primarily with state and local officials, election officials, but that campaigns were targeted. We saw that in 2016. We see it over and over again. We see it all around the world, but we see it here in the United States. And that they don't have the resources or we're not inclined to devote the resources to fixing that. And I'm speaking now mostly to the audience because I know, Ron, you know all of this. And so they started this, came up with this idea: what if companies could donate their services, cybersecurity services, to campaigns? And the first response was, well, that would be a campaign contribution. So they went to the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, which administers our election laws and campaign contribution requirements, et cetera, and got a ruling that as long as services were offered on a bipartisan basis, nonpartisan, bipartisan basis, and distributed fairly, and there was a level of transparency associated, et cetera, that this could actually be done. And so that's what DDC does. It finds cybersecurity providers who are willing to donate their services, either for free or deeply discounted, to campaigns to help them with their security, cybersecurity.
I think two issues that are worth pointing out is that one, it's an untraditional nonprofit. It's actually a campaign. So it's a 501c4,
Yep.
which means if you donate to it, you will be listed as a political donor on the website, which is probably a good thing. But the other thing is that I kind of get your question on this, your thoughts on this. Do you think it has a positive impact on candidates running, their knowledge about cybersecurity?
Well, we certainly have, I think, educated campaign staff because we have done a lot of outreach, mostly led by Michael Kaiser, our CEO, to campaigns, again, all across the country about these services and about why they should care, right? Why is cybersecurity important to them? It's a hugely complex challenge because they don't typically, congressional campaigns don't have CISOs. They probably don't even have much of an IT staff, if any. It's somebody working on their kitchen table, and they've got a lot of volunteers, and it's all distributed, and they're using their own equipment. So they're huge challenges.
And their own equipment is a Windows computer, a Mac laptop from their dad. This person's on an iPad. It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
Some of the things are real. And then other state legislator candidates are like, here's my CISO. I've met senators who have CISOs. It's amazing.
Yeah. So I think it has helped educate, and to the degree that that the staff is then able to talk to the candidates, or we're able to talk to the candidates, which we've certainly done in a number of situations. It helps to educate them as well.
Excellent. Well, speaking about education, a lot of the work you're doing at CSIS is educating the legal system. So can you tell us a little bit about the research you've done, some of the things you've published, and where people can go to learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I came into CSIS, one of the things that led me to CSIS was when I got out of DHS and I had way too much time to watch cable news all day long. And I found myself screaming at the TV and ultimately throwing things at the TV because I kept hearing people say the Russians will be back. Russian interference in our election, and they'll be back in 2018. And my first thought was they never left. So, this idea that somehow they've left and they're going to come back in 2018 is crazy. And we knew that what they were doing around elections was just part of a longer-term, broader campaign to undermine democracy writ large and trust in democratic institutions. And nobody seemed to be picking up on that. There was a lot of talk about investigations and finding out what happened. And I thought, we know enough now that we should be developing our countermeasures, our strategy for how we address this. And so I called my friend John Hamre at CSIS, the president and CEO of CSIS, and I said, am I crazy? And he said, no, not at all. Come over and we'll work on this. And so we had a couple roundtables with bipartisan national security experts, put out a report in December, Adversary Attacks on Democratic Institutions, with a series of recommendations. I then thought, okay, I'm going to do some red teaming. If I were Putin, and this was my goal, to undermine trust in democracy and democratic institutions, where would I go next? And I'm trained as a lawyer, as we've discussed, so I immediately thought about the justice system as another institution that, like elections, is so dependent on public faith and confidence in the legitimacy of the process to respect the legitimacy of the outcome. Like elections, it's totally, the public acceptance of the outcome is crucial, right? Courts can't enforce really their broad rulings on the law. We have a social contract in which we have all agreed that whether we like the outcome of a court decision or not, we will view it as binding. Well, if you could undermine trust in the system to a point where, for example, people thought they didn't have to pay any attention to court decisions, and as an aside, I think that's some of what we saw on January 6th in the insurrection at the Capitol, ignoring 60-plus court decisions that had rejected challenges to the fairness of the election, to the legitimacy of the election, that we would be in big trouble. And I thought, if I were Putin, that's where I'd go next. And when we started looking into it, we started finding all kinds of examples of Russian disinformation, information operations, targeting the public's trust in the justice system, in our courts. And so we put it all in a report called Beyond the Ballot. You can find it at csis.org. Again, the name of that report is Beyond the Ballot, and the project is Defending Democratic Institutions. So one of the things we did with that is we started briefing judges and courts all across the country, federal, judiciary, state, and local courts. We have done a whole series of workshops with state courts on how to detect and defend against disinformation, where lies are being told about what a court is doing, about a judge, about a decision, about what might be happening. Because we've seen it done. We've seen it happen in the United States, where Russians posing as Americans are spreading lies.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions about maybe IT and the internet and social media that you've encountered with judges and lawyers?
So, first of all, I think judges are often surprised to hear that a nation-state adversary may have them in their sights, and particularly, of course, state and local judges. But one of the most remarkable cases that I share with them is in Twin Falls, Idaho, where the Internet Research Agency targeted resources around a case in state court there. And so first bringing about their awareness and this idea that traditional malicious cyber activity might be, as much as anything, about undermining the public's trust in the courts. And so they needed to think of this as part of defending democracy. At the end of my remarks to judges, I always show them my bumper sticker, which is defend democracy, change your password. Judges are notoriously reluctant to have passwords, let alone change passwords. They are not known to be often the strongest supporters of cybersecurity. And so part of our goal is to empower their IT staffs, their admin staffs, to enlist the judges on what we see as the front line of defending democracy.
That's an amazing point. And I hate to be confirming of that, but that's been my experience too. These organizations that we put in very high regard, religious leaders, architects, lawyers, judges, they just somehow think cyber doesn't apply to them. And the story I always tell is, like, if all of a sudden we found out that Harry Potter was real and that there was ways you could do these spells and I could read your mind or levitate an object, people would still be doing it because cyber is basically the same thing. I could read your email, I can move your car, I can do things like that. And I don't know how many more news articles and stories and awareness we can do, but we still have a longer way to go. So I think that work is really well done. Anything with the Supreme Court?
So we have the Chief Justice's counselor has been following our work and been a wonderful kind of advisor periodically and supporter of our work. The Chief Justice in 2019, in his year-end report, having seen our report Beyond the Ballot, focused on the threat from disinformation to the public's faith and confidence in the courts. So, clearly the Chief Justice is very aware of the importance of maintaining public faith and confidence in the independence and impartiality and legitimacy of our courts.
And if we're going to talk about judges and lawyers, we probably have to talk about law firms. And I'll just say, as an investor in a whole bunch of funds and cyber companies, we'll have the cyber conversation, and we'll, it's pretty secure. I'd be pretty happy to talk about how we kind of lock things down. But then here comes an M&A or an NDA or something like that, and literally you're PDFing things with your social security number in them and whatnot. And I'm just stunned that the law firms, which have been targeted by China, probably by Russia too, but that they haven't really kind of moved forward, considering how much trust they're asking the public to put in them.
Yeah. Absolutely. One of the things that I am proud of in my my past is that I was a co-founder of the Cybersecurity Legal Task Force in the American Bar Association. And it has become a terrific group under some terrific leadership over the years for helping law firms think through their own cybersecurity. And in fact, has a terrific publication on cybersecurity for those doing mergers and acquisitions, how to include this as part of your due diligence. But lots of resources for law firms. I totally agree. Law firms are a treasure trove of sensitive information. The courts are a treasure trove of sensitive information. Bankruptcy courts have only recently begun to understand the degree to which they are an attractive target for nation states looking to acquire sensitive assets, but also sensitive information, for example.
So when I look at your DHS background, trying to protect critical infrastructure, what we're doing here with defending digital campaigns, and then now talking about law, a common thread in all that is the technology has gone way beyond people's ability to understand it. And we didn't teach how social media works in school. We don't teach people how to use an iPhone, which really go, and we just kind of give it to them and say, figure it out. So how can we best educate the general public to kind of make these issues go away, or at least make people more aware of them?
Yeah, we'll never make these issues go away, right? But raising awareness is certainly something we got to continue to work on. I think one of the challenges, and Ron, you and I have talked a little bit about this, is our use of the term cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. Right. And you have been very clever, I think, in creating a whole initiative around the use of the term data care, which I think is really smart. I think that's exactly what we need to do. We need to, cybersecurity it means too many different things. I always say it reminds me of back in the days when I was working on weapons of mass destruction. And we didn't really begin to make any real progress until we realized that, weapons, there's no such thing as a weapon of mass destruction. There's chemical weapons, there's biological weapons, nuclear weapons, radiological weapons, right? And until you start to break those down, they have things in common, but they are not the same, and they are not susceptible to this identical solution sets. So once you start to talk about them, more in plain English, if you will, you're much more likely to have people understand. When people hear us talk about, you need to do better on cybersecurity, or we need to do better on cybersecurity, they don't know, are we talking about, the fact that they get a letter in the mail every few months saying that their credit card is being replaced because of a breach, and they got to go and enter in all new information in their automatic payment systems, which is such a pain? Or are we talking about the electric grid being down for a month? Or something in between, right? And even in policy circles, even among those of us who live and breathe this every day, using that term is increasingly hampering our progress.
When my wife and I we visited you at the CSIS headquarters in DC, you had I'm going to call it a lawyer word, but you wanted to deconstruct cybersecurity. What was the word you used? Do you remember?
I think a lexicon. I wanted to come up with a new lexicon, to bring a group together to come up with new ways of talking about malicious cyber activity that American public and ordinary people could understand.
Well, on that note, so Cindy's the one who came up with the term data care, and we were specifically trying to steal from the healthcare industry and really try to make it a lot more personal, because we all have to do our own hygiene and buy life insurance and not overeat and don't smoke and all that kind of stuff. But yes, we might have a brain disorder someday. We might need a brain surgeon to go, to go fix us. Cybersecurity is very, very similar. And we were also trying to pull in people who wanted to get in the industry. So when you were at DHS, how much did you work on like K through 12 education, NICE, that sort of stuff, just educating the public, specifically kids?
Yeah. So I did a fair amount of public speaking when I was at DHS, and particularly in October, National Cybersecurity Month. But also then into December, which is, if I remember correctly, was National Critical Infrastructure Security and Resilience Month. And
I did not know that.
yes,
That's awesome.
yeah, it is awesome. It's
Yeah.
great. I think maybe that's November. December may be preparedness. Anyway, they all sort of fall one after the other. And so we did. I do think it's really important. And we had lots of good partners out there, including the organization that Michael Kaiser used to head, that would help with the, and we had developed the Stop Think Connect, which, you may or may not love that, but again, trying to get kids the same way Stop, Drop, and Roll sort of gets their attention. So it is critically important. I think equally important, Ron, is civics education. And that's, when you asked me about what I'm doing at CSIS, that is one of my key areas of focus right now. It flows very much from the disinformation work that we did, because, again, I think what our adversaries are trying to do is convince Americans to give up on the idea of truth, give up on the idea that they can bring about change, and then we lose the informed and engaged citizenry upon which democracy depends. I think we need to teach people how to be more effective agents of change. That means understanding how government works and their role in holding it accountable. But it's also about creating a sense of civic identity and civic responsibility. So when I was at DHS and I was doing all that public speaking, my public affairs folks would always put in this talking point: cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. And I always said it, but I always could see people's eyes glaze over. They didn't really know what that meant, and it didn't resonate. And I think that's in part because we have lost a lot of that sense of civic responsibility. And I used to try to use this analogy of, do you think it would be okay if someone was down in your basement, never bothered you, but they were tunneling from your basement into all your neighbors' houses and stealing things from their homes? But it was, never bothered you at all, didn't take anything from your house. Is that okay? And that's, what a poor cyber hygiene that allows an adversary, of course, to take over your system, enables. And so I'm a big believer in reinvigorating civics education in this country. And I think it has direct application to cybersecurity.
I just want them to teach the kids that social media, how that works the same way they teach how credit cards and banking and life insurance, we all learned life insurance is really death insurance. Social media is really selling your information online for a free, great product to hook, get your high school friends and whatnot.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about the past. Now, you wrote an article that you shared with me that the title was said, "No More Secrets" by like 2013 or 20, but you wrote this a long time ago, like 2010. So what was the gist of the article? And then now that it's 2021, what was, and we'll put this in I'm going to let you tell the story. We'll put this in the notes and whatnot. But I thought it was interesting that the article was called "No More Secrets."
Yeah.
Which of course is a callback to C-Tech astronomy and sneakers and stuff. So
Exactly.
how'd the article come about?
Exactly. So in 2008, I was at a conference being held by the Director of National Intelligence on open source information. And there was a panel that included Don Burke from CIA, who had developed Intellipedia. And he made the point, he's really the one who said, in 10 years, there will be no more secrets. And I remembered walking out of that panel thinking, that is really profound. He may or may not have the timeline right. No more secrets, maybe that's a little extreme. But as the more I thought about it, the more I realized, transparency is not just a value that you either support or don't support. Transparency is a reality. That train of a transparent world is coming at us full steam ahead. And we are so not ready. We are just not ready. This is what I was thinking in 2008. And it took me a couple years to write this relatively short piece in which I sort of laid out that we need to get our heads around this idea that the shelf life of secrets is vanishingly short, that our ability to have a monopoly on information is rapidly dwindling, that the costs of trying to compete based on having a monopoly on information, whether it's because you kept it secret or you're the only one who developed it, in a world in which there are so many benefits from networking, from sharing information, that has to be calculated as part of the cost of trying to protect the secrecy of information. And that whoever could figure out how to operate with fewer secrets, to operate more in the open, was going to have a distinct advantage in the world. And whether you're a country, and I made the point at the end of that piece that as a democracy, we have an advantage. It is to our advantage to push into this open world because we have more experience operating in a transparent world than our adversaries, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, who hide in dark corners. And businesses, who can learn to operate with fewer secrets. So I then was going to write a book called Training to Fight in the Light. If you train to fight in the dark, you could meet your adversary at night and you'd have the advantage. We needed to be training to fight in the light so that as that transparent world comes at us and lights are going on in all the dark corners, that we have the advantage, that we know how to prevail and to win.
As you're going into that, I was kind of imagining Bane and Batman kind of going back and forth because they both, of course, fight in the darkness and made of the darkness, wherever the quote is there. That's awesome. What happened to the book?
I went to DHS. I went to work at DHS on cybersecurity. And I always thought it was kind of ironic that somebody who had been out and I'd put on conferences around this idea of no more secrets now found herself, leading a team working with a government and private sector on how to keep secrets, on how to protect information. And it, it was just, again, a reminder of what I noted in the piece in 2010. Training to fight in the light, emphasis on the training, right? We're not at a point where we could just throw open all the doors, but we need to get there.
Well, I think the concept of time is an interesting thing when it comes to cybersecurity. Of course, you got Dimitri talking about his 11060 as a measurement of how well you can find adversaries on your network because you can't keep them out. There's this shelf life, like even the DoD and all their infinite wisdom. 50 years is kind of when everything kind of expires, right? So it's definitely interesting. I would encourage you to write the book because I think the United States and the Western world, they don't realize that we are operating at an advantage and they think it's a disadvantage when it comes to competing against these state-run, businesses that are out there. But at the same time, I've also heard stories where perhaps there is a company that's been compromised by China and they've stolen some IP. And this business was American, and maybe they were never going to do business in China. And they ring them up and they're like, hey, why don't you just consult with us? Because, yeah, you got your IP, but you don't know what it means. Let's at least work with you. Right? So I'm seeing ways like that to kind of bring our adversaries into things. And I think it will have a more effect on their countries, maybe switch them to democracy sooner than later, which is interesting.
Yeah,
really right. You got to write that book. Did you ever write a manuscript or anything?
I didn't, and I got some good advice, which was if you can't get to writing the book, write a long article, for Atlantic or something. And I really do need to carve out time. But as you and I were talking about, it's first I need to learn how to say no to things, and then
like coming to Maryland and doing podcasts, right?
Yeah, well, say no to other things.
That's phenomenal. All right. So let's kind of close out with some what I call like the Hollywood fiction. It's Gulatech Cyber Fiction Show. And you told me ahead of time that you're not like an avid science fiction reader or anything like that. But if any, you're home during COVID. Did you watch anything that you said, oh, that could be true, or that could be? Did you see any of the shows on TV had to do with attacks on the country, cyber espionage, that kind of stuff?
We watched a bit of The Americans. That was good. People had been telling me for years, you got to watch this show.
There's some 80s tech in that show. That's good.
Yeah. But again, I think understanding the persistent presence of our adversaries in our midst, right? I did read a bit of science fiction. I have a few pieces of science fiction that I've enjoyed over the years. But I will confess that I don't have a lot of time to read anything other than the fabulous articles that are popping up every day that come into my Twitter feed primarily.
That's true. So who do you follow on Twitter? Who do you like to read? What do you subscribe to?
Yeah. So one of the reasons that I actually like being on Twitter, I haven't been attacked yet, and hopefully this won't prompt attacks, is that there are a lot of smart people out there, and I'm able to follow them and get the benefit of what they're reading. So it's a lot of pieces about disinformation, so much tremendous research and thinking that's going on right now about how we deal with disinformation, and then more broadly with the impact of digital media on our society and on our political discourse. A lot of really great stuff that's out there about that. I do occasionally at least buy and start to read books about cybersecurity. The last one I think I read cover to cover was David Sanger's Perfect Weapon, which is now out in paperback. It's been that long. And most recently, Nicole Perlmuth.
Perloth.
Perloff's.
This is how
they tell me the world
gonna
ends.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, yes.
I love to read her stuff in the New York Times. I think she's a really smart writer, and I have started the book. I think it's off to a good start. I'm looking forward to reading that. It's just and again, and you asked a question sort of along these lines earlier about kind of can fiction help us think through. Be more imaginative, right? Open our aperture to what's possible. And I think for me, it's less about fiction scaring me, opening my aperture to what can happen, because there's enough happening right now that is scary enough. I do look to fiction sometimes for inspiration about where we should be going. And so I do think that some of my thinking on Training to Fight in the Light is influenced by David Brin, for example, and some of the early stuff that he did about transparency.
David Brin's awesome. That's he's up there with Hyland and some good folks.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite powers of fiction is a real quick short story where grad students working on physics, and a bunch of guys in suits show up, and hey, your professor's been nabbed by the Russians. We don't know what he's working on. Go into his office, all this like anti-gravity kind of equations and stuff like that. And there's a video of him flying on the disc and said, well, we don't know how this works. So the guy gets it to work, right? And then it turns out the guy was never abducted. It was just all a ruse to get him just the power of belief, right? And I think that fiction can still kind of help us do that. So if people want to get a hold of you and you're not going to say no to them for speaking or seeing what you're writing, what's the best way for people to follow you?
So you can always find me through csis.org. They list all the experts, and my email address is there. On Twitter, my handle is Spaulding Says, SEZ. So Spaulding with a U. And those are really the best ways. I am on LinkedIn. I never check it. So all of you who have asked me to please, accept your requests for connection or whatever, don't take it personally. Or message me. I just hardly ever check LinkedIn.
We'll be donating $1 to everybody who links in with her for defending digital campaigns. That's great. What about conferences? I think we're approaching where everybody's fully vaccinated. Do you think we're going to go back to in-person conferences in cyber pretty soon?
It's interesting, Ron, that you say that. This is my very first in-person public event since the rollout of the commission report last March. So over
I'm honored.
Year.
Thank you.
I am fully vaccinated. I know you and Cindy have been jabbed as well, and we are sitting, apart from each other and, being careful. I'm wearing high heels today for the first time in over a year.
I am not wearing high heels in over a year, or I think ever. So
one of my funnest memories of COVID is going to be when I testified in front of the Senate committee wearing my bedroom slippers. Subsequently testified in front of Congress in bare feet. It was great. But yes, I think we will go back. I really miss hallway conversations. I miss those opportunities to connect. It is kind of fun on the Zoom calls to do the side chat, but it is really not the same. And I I really am hopeful. I am so grateful to all of the scientists, researchers, medical professionals, first responders, all of those who have helped us get to where we are today in terms of being able to hopefully see a light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm cautiously optimistic, but I do encourage everyone out there to get the vaccine.
Awesome. Well, Suzanne, thank you very much for coming on the Gula Tech Cyber Fiction Show. This is Ron Gula signing off, and I hope everybody enjoyed this. We'll talk to you next time.